In this video, I'm going to walk you through the setup of PopperVR. Before we begin installing anything, let's just talk about the prerequisites for this. PopperVR is installed inside of a pinup system environment. On my setup, I'm using Nailbuster's Baller installer, which has already configured and set up pinup system for me. You should also already have had your VR helmet installed and set up with your computer. You should run Steamvr on your setup and have its OpenXR runtime set to Steamvr. And we'll walk through how to check that in the video. You should also have a working visual pinball VR environment set up. Sometimes this is referred to as VPVR, and sometimes it's referred to as the executable name. But the bottom line is it needs to be up and running before you even try any of this and know that it works. Optionally, you could also have a future pinball BAM VR environment set up and working. But the key here is that these things are running and working and you know how they work in your environment already before adding PopperVR. The first thing you'll need to do is head over to the Pinup System Wiki to download PopperVR. So let's take a moment and install PopperVR and create the emulator within Pinup System. The first thing you want to do is, after you've downloaded the PopperVR install zip, you're going to want to right click on it, go to Properties, and check the Unblock box and click Apply. We just want to make sure that Windows has not blocked any of the files inside of the zip. The next thing we want to do is we want to unzip the archive, and then we're going to go into here, into the unzipped archive, and I'm going to copy all of these files, and I'm going to paste them into my pinup system environment. So here I am in my C drive vPinball pinup system. This is a baller installer from Nailbuster on my environment. And I'm going to right click and paste. Now the files are being copied into this file structure. There is a file that will be overwritten, so I am going to replace that file, and that is the pinupmenu.exe. Pinupmenu.exe in the PopperVR install has an update for PopperVR. As of the recording of this video, it is bundled inside the PopperVR zip file. The other thing that was put here from the zip was desktop info.txt. It has a bit of script that needs to be copied if you're going to do a single screen desktop setup. That is outside the scope of this video, and that'll be detailed on the wiki for how to set that up if you're on a single screen desktop. In our launch folder, a few files were copied, but the main one is really this popmenu_VR mode -toggle. This will show up in your op menu, and it is a toggle. It's a toggle for, like a light switch. It's a toggle for turning on or off PopperVR. So you'll use that same entry in your op menu to turn it on and off. And then the PopperVR directory itself. Now this is the actual PopperVR files. You have a models directory. This is really kind of important because this is where you'll take your models, and they have a .glb extension. If you were to download other models, you'd put them into this folder. The install comes with a default .glb or default model or room for you to interact with, but the hope is that others will create rooms that then they'll share and distribute, and you'll be able to download those into this folder, and then within PopperVR you'll be able to select the room that you want to jump to or set a room as a default. I'll also show you where the models directory is and the default model is pointed to within the config file in just a moment. Then there's the PopperVR executable. Now you could launch this directly, but you don't want to launch it this way. And the reason for that is the real power of this is that you're able to interact with all of your media, your Popper media. So your back glasses and your play fields as you scroll through your different tables. And in order to do that, you need to have Pinup System running. So you need to run Pinup System, then go to your op menu and launch PopperVR from there. But this is the executable that ultimately will be launched. And then the final, probably most important file in this directory structure for you to understand is the Json file. And this is the configuration file. JSON is just a text file, but it does have a format to it, so you don't want to mess around too much with it. You don't want to change the format and delete any brackets. But what you'll find is there's some options up here. Things such as tunnel. Tunnel is used for when you move around the VR environment. It creates sort of a tunnel vision for you. It blacks out the surrounding edges and makes you focus in on a circle in the center. And this is useful if you have any sensitivity to VR where you feel a bit of motion sickness. You can change this number. 60 is a pretty good number, or pretty good size for that, if you like that. I do not get motion sickness, so I bump that down to 10 for my use. Another thing that you should notice here is the model room. So you'll notice it's models, right? We were in the models folder, then a slash, then the default.glb. And what this is doing is it's saying, when we launch PopperVR, this is the default model I want to be in. It doesn't have to be called default. It can be called any model in that directory. Now you could change that here, but you could very easily change that within PopperVR when you launch it and you go into the menu system. You can select the room that you want or the model that you want and then click save, and that can become your default model that way as well. Some other things to note. Camera position. This becomes important. So when you spawn into the VR environment, if you find that you're not positioned correctly, so in other words, maybe you're a little lower than the pinball cabinet, or a little bit higher, or to the left of it or to the right of it, you would change that here. And the positions are X, Y, and Z. Now, one nuance with this, I should note, is that it's very common to think of Z as our up and down. In Unity, which is what Popper is based on, Y is the up and down. So you want to change this middle number here if you're a little bit too low or a little bit too high. I found sometimes I'm a little bit too low, so I will make this number 0.5. It is a float number, so you can try and play with that if you need to. The other parameter is camera rotation. So if you found that you were kind of turned to the side one way or another, or turned up or turned down, and you wanted to tweak that, you could tweak that with these settings as well. Now, in this section, one of the most important things I think for you to understand is the monitor number. You'll notice that David, Nailbuster, has put -1 in here for all of these entries, and that's because he's tried to make it very simple and leverage what he knows from the Pinup System environment to set your screens up appropriately. If, however, you have any sort of problem that the screens are not located in the position that they should be, you can change this number, and you could try a 1 or 2, etc., and you can see what the effect of it is. Pup ID, if you're familiar with Pup packs, Pup ID 0 is always topper, or Pup ID 2 is always backglass, so these are really the same thing. And then there's active, and there's 0, you'll see 2 here, you'll see a 3 in here, and that really gets into how are the screens shown in VR. Are they mirrored? Are we mirroring what's on the display? Are we using file? there's different things, and this will be outlined a bit more in depth in the wiki. But for right now, by default, things should work fairly well out of the box for you. So just wanted to give you some awareness of what this file was. I'm going to save that for my change, and we're going to go back. So now that we've unzipped this into our pinup system folder, we're ready to set it up. So let's set up an emulator. So I'm going to launch pinup menu setup. And the first thing we'll do is we'll go into Popper Setup Emulators. And I'll click the plus to create a new emulator. And I'll give the display name, I'll call it Visual Pinball VR. And my description will be VPX VR. And the description is just for me to know what this was. And then again, I'm going to call it the same thing, Visual Pinball VR. So I'm going to copy that. For my MUID, I'll use the same thing. Now, our Launche EXE folder, this should point to where you installed Visual Pinball GL or Visual Pinball VR, right? So that's installed in my Visual Pinball X directory, and in that directory I have the executable. If I bring up the file system and I go into Visual Pinball, you'll see that I have Visual Pinball X _gl.exe. One other thing to note is, next we're going to have to tell it where our games folder is. I do not use my normal tables folder for my VR tables. I put them in something called, I call it VR tables, you could call it tables VR. I just keep it separate. Because while a lot of tables today have both options in them, you usually have to still set a bit in the table script to turn on or off the VR room. So I keep the tables separate. So I have a VR tables directory. So let's set that in the emulator. And VR tables. The file extension is still VPX. So put that there. And we'll create a media directory for the media that we'll need for this. And you're welcome to share a directory if it makes sense. Maybe it's your Visual Pinball X, but I'm going to right-click in here and click New. And I'm going to call it Visual Pinball VR. Again, for consistency. And it says the media folder is empty. Would you like to initialize the folder structure and defaults now? Yes, I would. And that's just going to create a bunch of subfolders underneath that directory. Okay, I'm going to click the check mark now just to save all of that. But now we're going to move into the Launch Script tab. So for that, we're going to go over to the web page for the wiki. And on the web page for the wiki, you're going to find that there are 4 options, at least as of the recording of this video, there are 4 options for Launch Script. There is the default, or option 1, and it is the suggested option. It is an auto hotkey script, an AHK script. All you need to know about that is at the top of the script, there is a semicolon AHK that needs to be there in the script that tells the pinup system that this is an auto hotkey script and it'll know how to process and handle it. But this is the recommended one, and then there's the close part. But if you're not comfortable with auto hotkey and you prefer the original style scripts, then you could do option 2. Now there are no registry overrides. I'll talk a little bit about those, but this will get things set up and running in a normal script mode. Option 3 is similar to that, except that in this case, it will close and launch PopperVR between runs. The default script, or the recommended script, will make PopperVR hibernate. So David Nailbuster did a bit of testing to see if he made PopperVR hibernate, how much of the system resources would it actually take up? How much of the GPU would it take up? And it was very little. But he acknowledges that for some systems, you may not want any of that overhead. So if that's the case, you can use option 3, and it will launch and reopen or close, launch and close PopperVR between runs. Finally, there's option 4. Now, if you're not using Steamvr, which again, we highly recommend Steamvr as your OpenXR driver, but if for some reason you've decided, no, I absolutely can't do that, then David has provided an example script for handling that situation as well. But for us, for this video, we're going to work through and use the AHK, the recommended AHK, right? Option 1. And if you look at the script and you read through it, you're going to see some of the things that are in your normal visual pinball script, like the full screen mode, disabling true full screen. You can enable that or disable that right here. This is this is an option to close or reopen PopperVR between games. By default, we don't want to do that. We want it to hibernate, so it's set to 0. Here are some values that the VR or the visual pinball VR community has said are important for getting the most out of visual pinball VR, having things run as smoothly as possible. One of these areas, disable B2S, has a lot of controversy around it because if you disable B2S, you will have no DOF toys running. So, but some tables will run better if you have disabled B2S to 1. So, right here you can set all the default values in this section, but David also gave the ability to override them. So if you had a certain table that needed something differently, then you could do that in your custom one, and you just have you add these entries, use B to S, or no DMD, or no pup, and it will set it appropriately, and then it'll write these values to the registry before running visual pinball x _gl.exe. Now, here's an important note. The visual pinball VR and regular visual pinball share the same registry for the most part, settings. So when we set these settings for our VR environment, we have to then set them back for cabinet mode, and David does this after visual pinball GL launches, so that we're always set back to what's going to be appropriate for your cabinet mode. So just so you're aware, we'll always set things back to what's appropriate for the cabinet mode after we launch with the settings needed for VR, and this just will protect your environment. And then the rest of this is actually launching the environment. Okay, so let's copy this script, the launch script, and I'm going to use the recommended one, the new AHK or auto hotkey script. Copy all of this. I'm going to right click, click copy, and then I'm going to paste it into the launch script section. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to copy the close script portion. Make sure I get all the brackets, copy, and paste into the close script. I'm going to click that checkbox, and I'm going to click close. And now our emulator is set up. The next thing we want to do is go to the Games Manager tab. We will import a few games. So launch Games Manager. Come across the top here to add new games. I'm going to drop down for our new emulator, Visual Pinball VR, and I'm going to scan for new games. Now I have a few games in my folder. I'm only going to copy just a few of them. I'm going to add the games to my system by clicking that button. And it says 3 new games added. Okay. So we're going to close this. And now I'm going to create a playlist. So my playlist, I'm going to click Add New Playlist. Call it Visual Pinball VR. I'm going to select it, and on the drop down on this side, I'm going to select Visual Pinball VR, and I see the 3 games I've added. I know that I'm selected because it says Visual Pinball VR up here, so I'm going to click Add Game, Add Game, Add Game. Now these 3 games are part of my Visual Pinball VR playlist. I'm going to click Close, and then of course if I wanted to, I could go into Media Manager, again select Visual Pinball VR, and then select the table, maybe add a wheel. No, that's the wrong wheel. This is back to the, let's search that, there we go. And I'll find a wheel I want. Or maybe I'll look for an animated wheel. We put a filter in here, filter results for that. Oh, we have some animated wheels. Major Frenchie's animated wheel. Great, I'm going to use that. And the next one. Remove my filter because I don't believe there's an animated wheel for this. And use the image. So you get the idea. This is the same that you'd be doing for your normal visual pinball tables, adding the media for them. You can add whatever media you like and click Close on that. And at this point, we're ready to launch and start things up. Let's take a moment to look at Steamvr. If we go to Settings, and then Developer, you'll notice your current OpenXR runtime. You want this to say Steamvr. If it says anything other than Steamvr, there should be a button here where you can click it and select it to set it back to Steamvr. You're welcome to try other OpenXR runtimes. However, we've done most of the testing with Steamvr, so you're likely to have the best results with that. For the video, I'm on a single screen desktop computer I'm working on, so that's what you're seeing at the moment. And what I wanted to show you was if I hit my operator menu and I come down to custom scripts, you'll see I now have a VR mode toggle. And it is a toggle. Think of it as a light switch. You will toggle VR turning on and toggle it turning it off. So that is how you will launch PopperVR and get into the environment. One thing I'll mention, just as if you were running your VR helmet with Visual Pinball VR outside of PopperVR, you need to make sure that your VR helmet is on. So just make sure you're hooked up and ready to go when you then toggle into VR mode. Now there are other ways to do this. If your system was purely dedicated to VR and you wanted PopperVR to always be running, then there are options on the Wiki which describe how to set that up in your pinup system environment. So why don't we just take a look at how things are at the moment when we launch PopperVR. Okay, so we are in VR, and I have, again, a single desktop set up in my environment, so that's why it looks a little different for you. But I can go into my playlist for VR, can get to my tables. There we go. So now I'm in VR with my table. I could play it. If I were to hit my exit key on my cabinet, it will exit this table and it will bring me right back into PopperVR. And that's it. We've set things up. We've been able to launch into PopperVR. We've been able to launch our tables in PopperVR. Just a quick note on Future Pinball BAM VR. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, you really need to have your emulators up and running and working properly before you add them to PopperVR. So ensure BAM VR is set up and working in your environment. I do recommend Terry Red's Future Pinball videos. His mega guide does include a section for setting up BAM VR. Once you know that that is up and running properly for you, then you should check the PopperVR Wiki for the Future Pinball script. We do have a script, an AHK script for Future Pinball, BAM VR that is, that you'll be able to set up, and then you'll have that emulator in your environment. You can follow the same steps in this video that we did for Visual Pinball VR to create that emulator, add your tables, and enjoy. It's as simple as that. Some quick VR recentering tips for your scripts. So what I've done as of recent is I've added my recentering key into my launch scripts. So in Visual Pinball VR, the recentering key is configurable in the UI. So launch your Visual Pinball x_gl.exe, go into the preferences for the keystrokes, and you'll be able to set up a key for recentering. In Future Pinball BAM VR, the recentering key is defaulted for you to F12. I don't believe there's a way to change that, at least not that I've noticed. So that is the recentering key. And what you can do is take a sample piece of AHK, like I have on this slide, and send that keystroke. So in this case, this is what I use for Future Pinball BAM VR. I send that F12 key, I send it down, I wait or sleep for 500, and then I send it up. You may need to add a sleep before it, depending on your system and how fast or how slow it is, before this send of the F12 down. And of course, if you make your recentering key for Visual Pinball VR something different than F12, you would want to use that key for that. But if you put this at the bottom of your launch script, then it'll get called once it launches, right? Once it launches the table, it will then call these keystrokes, and it should recenter you right in front of the cabinet. So just a handy tip. I know I've appreciated the ability to do this in my environment. It just makes life a little bit easier. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was useful for you in helping you get set up and running with PopperVR. Of course, always check the wiki, as I've said numerous times throughout this. That is where the latest and greatest and up-to-date information is. And with that, I hope you'll enjoy PopperVR as much as I do, and we'll see you in virtual reality.